Mom spends thousands of my money on my entitled sister's wedding, but I froze the account. I'm going through a tough dilemma. My mom and sister have been exploiting me financially for years, but now they've crossed a line. I'm at the point where I want to cut them off entirely, but doing so would push them into poverty. That feels harsh, but at the same time, I'm tired of their endless demands. I'm 38, married with 2 kids, and living in Ohio for the past 6 years. I grew up in Houston, but my childhood wasn't exactly idyllic. My parents divorced when I was 10 after my dad accused Mom of infidelity. To this day, it's unclear whether the accusation was true. Mom never remarried, but the rumor stuck. When my parents split, my sister was 5. Dad suspected she wasn't his biological child, which apparently drove the divorce. As part of the settlement, Dad gave Mom the house we lived in and moved out. He paid for my education but not for my sister's. For reasons I still don't understand, Mom never contested this. This fueled speculation that Dad's accusations about my sister were true. Dad wasn't in the picture much during my early years. He'd occasionally show up to pay my school fees or bring me gifts, but that was it. When I started high school, I reached out to him and we began building a relationship. Over time, I grew closer to Dad than to Mom. He even attended my wedding, despite Mom's objections. He visited me in Ohio twice after I settled here. Unfortunately, this didn't last long. Dad was diagnosed with a terminal illness and passed away last year. Before he died, he named me his heir. Since he didn't have children from his second marriage, he left me everything. A $400,000 trust fund. This inheritance drove an even bigger wedge between me and my mom and sister. They've always resented me because Dad paid for my education, giving me opportunities my sister never had. I attended a better school, went to a better college, and built a better life, all thanks to him. Meanwhile, Mom and my sister struggled financially, which only deepened their bitterness. Mom and my sister have been asking me for money ever since I started working. As my income grew, so did their demands. While I don't owe them anything, I've helped them over the years because they're family and don't make much money. Mom works as a cashier at a supermarket, and my sister works in boutique sales. Together, they earn less than half of what I do, so I've always felt an obligation to help. Even though we're not emotionally close, they've never been outright cruel to me. I guess that's why I've continued to support them financially. But this time things have gone too far. A couple of months ago, Mom called and mentioned that the house she and my sister live in is falling apart. The walls and ceilings are crumbling. The wiring hasn't been repaired in decades, and the house hasn't been painted since Dad left. She hinted that they needed help but didn't directly ask for money. After that, she started calling me more frequently, 3 or 4 times in a month, which was unusual for her. Finally, she outright asked me for $100,000 to renovate the house, promising to pay me back in installments. I was furious. I don't have that kind of money to lend, I told her. She hinted at the inheritance, which only made me angrier. In the heat of the moment, I offered $50,000 instead. Later, I regretted it. I could have ignored her, but now I'd committed to helping. My husband suggested lending the money in installments and monitoring the progress of the renovations before releasing more funds. I activated an old bank account I had in Houston, transferred $10,000 into it, and gave Mom access. She immediately asked why I didn't transfer the money directly to her account, but I dodged the question with a vague excuse. This was my husband's idea, and I hoped it would work. It's been 2 months since I started lending money for the renovations, and I can't shake the feeling that something's off. I'm not entirely sure how, but I suspect my mom and sister are trying to use this as an opportunity to take more than they need. Over the last 2 months, I've sent my mom $20,000 for what was supposedly house renovations. But I've decided not to send another penny. I knew they were being nice to me only because of the money, but I never imagined they would lie to me so blatantly. If they'd been upfront about their intentions, it wouldn't have hurt this much. Recently, I found out my sister is getting married. Not from my family, but through a mutual school friend. Her husband is a wedding planner, and my sister had contacted his agency to plan her grand wedding, as she called it. A grand wedding worth $50,000. I don't think my sister realized I'm friends with them. Hearing about her wedding from someone else stung. I wasn't invited, nor was I even told about it. My friend mentioned the guest list was around 100 people. Not exactly a small, intimate gathering. It hurt to know I wasn't included in that 100. But what bothered me more was the question. Where did she get the money? This wasn't some backyard celebration. It was being held at one of the best venues in town, with unlimited food and drinks, extravagant decorations, and fresh flowers. I checked the account where I'd been sending money to Mom for the renovation work. It was empty. I called Mom and asked if the renovation had started. She claimed she had hired a renovation company, but the work hadn't begun yet. I couldn't take her lies anymore. At that point, I didn't have definitive proof they were using my money for the wedding, but the thought of it disgusted me. Part of me wanted to fly down to Houston to see what was happening, but I knew it wasn't worth it. Instead, I called my aunt, my dad's sister, who lives a few blocks away from Mom's house. I asked if she knew about my sister's wedding. She said yes, but mentioned she wasn't invited either. "Your mom isn't fond of your dad's side of the family," she added. "So that's no surprise." Aunt told me the wedding had become the talk of the neighborhood. Until a few years ago, their house was falling apart, and they were struggling just to put food on the table. Now the house is sparkling with fresh paint, and they're planning a grand wedding. It's bizarre. Aunt's words hit hard. Just a few months ago, Mom had asked me for $20,000 for her supposed knee transplant. I decided to test her story. I called Mom and asked for the name of the orthopedic specialist she visited, pretending a friend needed details for her father's knee surgery. Mom fumbled for words, unable to provide any details. When I pressed her for the hospital or clinic name, she pretended there was a network issue and hung up. After that, her phone stayed off for hours, and when I called again later, she didn't answer. That confirmed it. The money I gave her for the knee transplant went toward the house renovation, and the money I'd been sending for the renovation was actually funding my sister's extravagant wedding. My aunt also mentioned that my sister's engagement had been held on the front lawn of our house, decorated with lilies and overflowing with wine. I felt like I'd been living under a rock. They were flaunting a lavish lifestyle while pretending to be poor to siphon money from me. I was done. I stopped sending money to the account. When Mom called, I ignored her. When my sister, who hasn't called me in years, tried to reach out, I ignored her too. I was done with their lies and manipulation. It didn't matter that I earned more than them, or that my father left me an inheritance. That didn't give them the right to leech off me with false pretenses. I vowed to spoil my mom's princess's big day. Update. I was right about Mom. When I didn't respond to her calls or texts, she called my husband. I had warned him not to engage, but of course he picked up. She cried and accused me of ghosting them, claiming the renovation work was halfway done and I had betrayed her by cutting off the money. Then my husband, trying to be honest, blurted out the truth. He told her I knew she'd been using me, and that the money was going toward my sister's wedding instead of the house. I couldn't believe he said that. I felt like smacking him on the head. I had planned to let them suffer a little longer, to feel the consequences of their actions. But thanks to my husband, they knew I'd caught on. Mom and my sister had been exposed, but I didn't get the satisfaction of watching them squirm. After my husband's phone call with my mom, she bombarded my phone with calls and messages. She insisted it was all a misunderstanding and claimed she had borrowed money for the house repairs, which she was now repaying with the funds I provided. I knew this was just more nonsense. After her constant attempts to reach me, I agreed to talk, but only if she promised to tell me the truth. Finally, on a call, she confessed everything. Mom admitted my sister wanted a grand wedding but didn't have the money. They decided to use the house renovation as an excuse to get the money from me, assuming I wouldn't find out since I hadn't visited Houston in years. When I asked why they hadn't just told me the truth, Mom said my sister didn't want to ask me directly for a favor. She didn't want to feel like she owed you, Mom said. The irony was infuriating. I pressed her further. And the knee transplant? Was that a lie too? Mom got quiet before finally admitting they had used that money to repair the house quickly so my sister's future in-laws could visit. We panicked and couldn't come up with a better emergency excuse, she said. Though I kept my voice steady on the call, I was crying inside. My own mother had manipulated me for money, and it broke my heart. I understood they had financial struggles, but that didn't give them the right to deceive me repeatedly. After the call, I cried for hours. I hadn't cried this hard since my father passed away. I missed him deeply, feeling he was the only one who had genuinely cared for me. 2 days later, I received a voicemail from Mom. Instead of apologizing or showing remorse, she asked me to send the remaining money so they could continue with the wedding preparations. There was no regret in her tone, only entitlement. They didn't even invite me to the wedding, not even as a formality. Her words disgusted me. I wanted to lash out at her, but I held back. Instead, I blocked both her and my sister. I even warned my husband that if he entertained any more of their calls, he'd be sleeping on the porch in the cold. I wasn't joking. I stayed in touch with my aunt during this time, but I didn't share the details about the money. She informed me that my mom and sister were struggling to pull off the wedding they dreamed of. Good, I thought. They deserved to feel the consequences of their actions. Despite blocking them, Mom and my sister continued trying to reach me. They left voicemails and texts pleading for the money right up until the day of the wedding. Their final voicemail came from Mom, who said she was ashamed of me, was disowning me, and that I should never call her Mom or visit her again. Hearing that broke me. I cried my heart out to my husband. I knew people might think I was cruel for ruining my sister's wedding, and Mom accused me of being selfish and arrogant. But she never acknowledged her lies or deceit. I had helped them out of obligation, considering them family, but they treated me like a money machine. That same day, I got a call from my friend, whose husband was the wedding planner. She told me the wedding was likely to be canceled because my mom and sister hadn't paid the remaining installment for the event. When I asked how much they'd already paid, she said $20,000. $20,000 is enough for a decent wedding, I replied. She explained that my sister had chosen one of the best venues in town, which alone cost $20,000, leaving nothing for decorations, food, or anything else. She asked if I was attending the wedding, but I said no, using work as an excuse. She knew I wasn't close to my mom and sister. I felt terrible knowing I'd ruined their wedding. For a moment, I even considered sending the remaining money to my friend to salvage the event. But then I remembered Mom's last voicemail, where she disowned me. What was the point of helping people who only saw me as a wallet? I turned off my phone and spent the day out with my kids to distract myself. The next day my friend called again. She was furious at my sister, saying the wedding had hurt her husband's reputation as a planner. On the day of the wedding, Mom and my sister begged him to arrange something bare minimum, promising to pay an additional $10,000 later. He managed to pull off a modest event with basic food and decorations, but the guests and groom's family criticized everything. Instead of taking responsibility, my sister blamed the planner for ruining her wedding. My friend's husband wanted to tell everyone the truth, but Mom pleaded with him not to, saying it would destroy my sister's life. Being a good man, he stayed quiet and let the blame fall on him. To make matters worse, they still haven't paid him the promised $10,000. I felt ashamed hearing all this. My friend assured me she wasn't blaming me but was venting her frustration. Still, I couldn't shake the embarrassment of being associated with such behavior. After everything I heard from my friend about the wedding, I felt terrible. Not just for my family's embarrassment, but for the way they handled the entire situation. Especially putting all the blame on the wedding planner. My husband tried to console me, saying, "They got what they deserved. Don't feel bad for them. They brought this on themselves by trying to impress everyone through lies." He was right. I realized that my mother disowning me might actually be a blessing in disguise. I no longer have to deal with their manipulative tactics or emotional games. I can finally live my life without their lies hanging over me.